Raider Nation, what's going on? We got some breaking news. The Las Vegas Raiders have just fired head coach Pete Carroll. My name is Mitchell Renz. Y'all are watching the Raiders Report. And coming up here on today's program, we're going to get into the latest around the silver and black, moving on from 74-year-old coach Pete Carroll. If you don't already know, this is why you subscribe. When Raiders news happens, I'm going to keep you up to date. I take pride in trying to be the very first person to not only give you the news, but also, we're going to have some fun today. I'm not celebrating the fact that a man lost his job. I'm celebrating as a Raiders fan today. I feel like we're moving in the right direction. We have the number one overall pick. You got 10 draft picks in total, 107 plus million in salary cap space. This is going to be an organization that is moving in the right direction. So I'm going to celebrate today. I'm getting ready to go live 11 hours and 11 minutes. If you want to pull up, it's going to get rowdy. Let's talk about, though, why the Raiders decided to move on from Pete. There were rumors, there are speculation that Pete was going to be able to step down, that Pete was going to retire. He spoke at the podium yesterday in regards to those rumors, and Pete had no idea what people were talking about. There might be some people that say Pete retired. There might be some people that say Pete Carroll wanted to step down, depending on who you listen to. But let's get the facts straight here. The Raiders decided to move on from Carroll after one season as a head coach. The crazy part about this is, obviously, Russ Raider fans, Mark Davis, they have been hiring and firing guys left and right because Carroll, he's the third head coach to be fired since 2023. Pretty flippin' wild, right? Pete also had 2 years left on his contract, and Mark wants to win. You got it. You can say what you want about Mark Davis. Mark Davis wants to win football games. And another moving on here from a head coach, I think, proves that because Pete had 2 years left on his contract, was making about $15 to $16 million per year on that deal. But when you look at the sample that was Pete Carroll, he is a legendary head coach. He's going to go down in the history books as one of the greatest coaches of all time. But he's going to go down in the history books as having the worst Raiders team of all time. If the Raiders would have lost to the Chiefs on Sunday, that would have been 15 losses. That would have been a Raiders franchise record. Luckily, they were able to get a win. But when you look at that win that they had in New England week 1, you sit there and you go, how the hell did the Raiders beat the New England Patriots, who right now are the number 2 seed? But from week 2 to where we are right now, the Silver and Black are easily, or I guess I can now finally say, were easily the worst team in the National Football League. You got your ass kicked so many different times. 8 games this season. You lost by 17-plus points. That's hard to do, most in the NFL. The Raiders also, when you bring in a head coach like Pete Carroll, he wanted to win right now. John Spytek wanted to be able to plan for the future. There was clear disconnect there. But when you look at this Raiders roster, I'm not saying there was a lot of talent on this roster, but I do think coaching matters, right? And when you look at this offense, it regressed from the season before. When you look at the defense, it regressed from the season before. When you look at special teams, it regressed from the season before. When you fire Chip Kelly, when you fire Tom McMahon, sooner or later, you can't find areas to point the finger. And all of a sudden, it got turned back at Pete Carroll. That's why he ended up getting fired. But I don't want y'all to hold back. Let me know. Great Pete Carroll's head coaching job with the Raiders. This is going to be the pinned comment here on today's program. A, B, C, D, or F. Hopefully we've all been to school. Hopefully we all know what those mean. My answer is going to be coming up here after this YouTube ad break. As a Raiders head coach, Pete Carroll gets a big old fat F. And I don't think anybody really expected me to say anything different. But, now that we're already in the 2026 offseason and having the number 1 pick, I'm feeling pretty damn good today as a Raiders fan, and I'm just being honest with you. I could also make an argument that he gets an A grade because when you look at Josh McDaniels' tenure, when you look at Antonio Pierce's tenure, when you look at John Gruden's tenure, the coaches that I have covered here at Chat Sports since doing the Raiders report, you can make an argument Pete Carroll's been the best damn coach we've had because none of those other coaches got us the number 1 pick. So if we're talking about 2025 job, that's an F. If we're talking about his job that he's done in 2026, the Raiders are undefeated this season. You beat the Chiefs for the first time at Allegiant Stadium, and we have the number 1 overall pick. I think 2026 Pete Carroll deserves an A, quite frankly. But let's be real here. Coaching matters. Tom Brady wanted Mike Vrabel last season. Soon as the Patriots ended their year, they ended up firing Gerard Mayo. They go out and get Vrabel. But you're looking at a roster that was 4-13 in 2024. Now they're 14-3, the number 2 seed in the AFC. Let's go now to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I was very high on Liam Cohen. If you don't believe me, go check out my videos last year. I wanted Liam Cohen. I didn't even have Pete Carroll in my top 10. Let's just be real. Jags were 4-13. Cohen was 13-4. Coaching freaking matters. The number 1 guy that the Raiders wanted was Ben Johnson. Bears, 5-12. They make some really good adjustments. And if you're the Raiders, look at what Chicago did last season. They traded, they built that offensive line up in free agency, and it's what they needed to be able to do. But another team that made a very quick transition. You can make a transition when you have the right people in power. The problem is we don't have the right people in power from a coaching staff standpoint. And I want to tip my cap to GM, John Spytek and Tom Brady, and that whole front office. Why? Good organizations allow their coaches to coach. The problem is we allowed our coaches to coach a little bit too much. Here's a crazy stat from Josh. Raiders had 5 games this season without scoring a touchdown. Only teams with more in the last 20 seasons. The 2006 Bed and Breakfast Raiders, and then the 2008 Browns. When you're Pete Carroll and you go out and you get your quarterback in Geno Smith, and Geno Smith was not only a disaster on the field, he was also a disaster off the field. I think the fact that this organization knows that Geno Smith wants the hell out of here, I think it just simply sits down. And Geno, you can say blame me. Pete Carroll can say blame Geno. But I do literally think that Pete Carroll's got him look at himself in the mirror and go, I made my bed. And unfortunately, it looked a lot like the 2006 Raiders bed and breakfast. Coming up next here, what's now the latest on John Spytek? Last season, Antonio Pierce spoke to the media, and they ended up firing him. Tom Telesco obviously also got the boot. When Josh McDaniels was fired, Dave Ziegler was fired. So a lot of times, head coach fired, then the GM gets fired. I'm going to tell you here in just a moment what's going to happen to John Spytek. Before we do, today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks. And we got a new year, new routine, making player picks for the first time. Trying something new can be hard. But in life and on Prize Picks, it always feels good to be right. With high-pressure playoff matchups every weekend and elite hoops action almost every night, the action never stops, and Prize Picks lets you take control. Find your community on Prize Picks with the new social feeds feature. You can share Prize Picks with your friends, copy lineups from winners in a single click, copy lineups you like or use them as inspiration for your own picks. You can even follow Prize Picks partners like us and tailor-fade our picks in just one click. Prize Picks is simple to play. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats. If you get your picks right, you can cash in. It's also available in all 50 states. Prize Picks always says it's good to be right. I sat up here on this show last year and I said the riskiest hire the Las Vegas Raiders could do is going out and getting Pete Carroll. Why? Because not only are you an organization that has failed to find a head coach, proof is in the pudding, Mark. But then you also bring in a guy at 74 years old that you literally can't rebuild with. So that means your plan was to hire a 74-year-old, get it right, and then have to have him leave and then get it right again. It's a terrible, terrible plan. Something that's a great plan for you, getting started with our sponsor here, Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Make sure that you use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. So in terms of John Spytek, and we're going to talk about Tom Brady, there's a lot of rumors, there's a lot of speculation out there of, well, who's going to lead the next head coaching search? I'm telling y'all right now, I'm not saying not other people besides Spytek and Brady, but the 2 head honchos in that will be Brady and they will be Spytek. Obviously, everything's got to get run by Raiders owner Mark Davis, but Brady was hired to do that job. Brady also trusts Spytek more than anybody else in that organization. You got to remember, they were teammates together at Michigan many, many years ago. So when you know that those 2 guys are in the search, and then there's a lot of people in that front office that were brought in from Howie Roseman's regime, from Omar Khan's regime, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, a lot of really good organizations. So now the question is, who will the Raiders hire next as their head coach? The only 3 names that I know for a fact that I have confirmed from my sources. I have done multiple shows on all three of the names here. Jesse Minter, I've been hearing for months at this point. Robert Saleh has been a name that's popped up here in the last 2 to 3 weeks, I would say. Brian Flores, I did an entire video on him last week, and now you're seeing some rumors pop up over the last 24 hours about Brian Flores, about Brian Dable as being a potential OC. But the only three confirmed head coach candidates, Minter, Saleh, Flores. What's interesting, all of those guys are defensive-minded head coaches. What I like, though, is all three of these guys are young. The other thing that I love, all three of them were on my Raiders head coach candidates video. If you haven't seen it, it's down in the comments. It's down in the description of today's program. Let's talk about money, baby, because I think a lot of people, when they see these head coach firings left and right, they're like, man, where does Mark Davis get all this money from? Well, he's a billionaire. So, spoiler alert, these numbers right here is like me giving Antonio Pierce $8, Josh McDaniels $10, John Gruden, here's $10 for you, Pete Carroll, $16 for you, Chip Kelly. There's no doubt about it. There's a lot of money being invested in this coaching staff. But also, if I was Mark Davis, I would look at this and I'd go, well, that's basically the amount of money Pete Carroll made me give to Geno Smith. I know when you look at the amount of coaches that are up here, people are like, man, there's no way he can keep hiring and firing people. The amount of money that you see up here on screen is pocket change to Mark Davis. And again, when you think about what they gave Geno, the money that you see on screen, it ain't nothing. Other NFL news that happened this morning, because the Raiders, they weren't the only team that decided to move on from their head coach. Adam Schefter reported that Kevin Stefanski is out as the Browns head coach. After moving on from Cleveland, Stefanski now is expected to be a top candidate in this hiring cycle. I don't know if the Raiders are interested in Stefanski, but if they are interested in Flores, I do think it could be intriguing. I don't know if Stefanski would be a head coach. Obviously, with the Raiders, the rumors with Flores, looking at Brian Dable as OC, one thing I would look at, if they start looking at Stefanski, maybe they're looking at him as more of a coordinator, because also Brian Flores has some of that Minnesota Vikings overlap as well. So that's one name, though. The Browns are keeping their GM. Another one that happened late last night, the Falcons, they decided to move on from Raheem Morris. This one also, I do think, is a little bit interesting. Raheem Morris does have some Sean McVay ties. If the Raiders were to go out and get maybe a Clint Kubiak, I think that's somebody you could consider to be a DC, since Patrick Graham is not going to be returning next season. I don't really want the Raiders to get Morris, but I will stand up here and say that he is a much better defensive coordinator than he is a head coach. And not everybody is built to be a head coach. Unfortunately, also not everybody is built to be a head coach for their entire life. And that's what happened to Pete Carroll. That is why he is out the door. But I want to be very clear here. I am wishing Pete nothing but the best. I hope that he takes his kid with him, both of his kids, like in all seriousness. We have a lot of good things that can happen this offseason for the Raiders. And the way that I want to get this offseason started, I remember a few years ago, I went live for 26 straight hours when the Raiders fired Josh McDaniels. I woke up at 1 o'clock in the morning. We came in here to the studio. We got up. We got rowdy. We got after it. I'm not going to go live for 26 hours because I had to learn the hard way that YouTube doesn't save a live stream anything over 12 hours. So a few months ago at this point, we were up here on this show and somebody asked me, Mitch, what's one of your wishes? I sat there and I go, well, 11-11. My wish is that the Raiders move on from Pete Carroll. So if you're wondering why I'm going to be going live for 11 hours and 11 minutes, it's because my wish is this, that the Raiders figure it the F out, that we get this team moving in the right direction. And yes, I feel bad that we've been hooting and hollering for so long about moving on from a 74-year-old guy that I do think gave his all, but just time has passed him, and it's just like in life. Sometimes it passes you by a little bit. But if you're ready to celebrate the 2026 Raiders, because I think it's going to be a great, great offseason, make sure you're subscribed. Make sure those notifications are turned on. I'm getting ready to go live here on the Raiders Report, and we're going to be live 11 hours, 11 minutes.